Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to the Ruth Joe Simons podcast. I recently was asked a question while I was on stage for a Q&A, and the question was, have I ever experienced, they asked, have you ever experienced a time where you lost a friend or didn't have support for when you were first starting out in your work? Um, I think I got that right. So the question was basically, have you ever experienced lack of support or just felt that your friendships fell off when you were just starting out and trying to do this work that, at the time on stage, they were addressing things like my book writing or starting a business or being online. And I smiled and I said, "Oh, yes, I know that feeling. Maybe I've not experienced it to the degree that some others have, but I have a story to share about that." You see, when I first started off, I remember the blog started in, I think, 2008. I believe that's right. And I don't know if y'all know this, but I started the blog because I had a PC and we kept all the photos on that computer. And man cub number 3, Judah, who went through the spine surgery, if you guys have listened to the previous episodes, um, he is now 18, but he was a toddler. I think he was 2 years old. And um, the computer crashed and we lost all our photos. And so I started the blog and I called it Grace Lays, to Finding Grace in the Everyday, in part because I thought, okay, rather than just keep all these photos sitting here, I'm going to not only document my family and my life, but also talk about how God's grace intersects my daily life. That's always been my goal. And here we are all these years later. And even on the Ruth Joe Simons podcast, I'm really talking about how God's grace and how the gospel impacts our everyday life. And so I started writing. And at first, I knew it wasn't like a photo journal. I knew the blog wasn't a photo journal. I knew it was to kind of work out some of these things that were going on in my mind and my heart. And then a few years in, I was realizing I really wanted to do this more seriously. I wanted to be considerate of how I was growing in my writing. I wasn't getting paid for it. Nothing was going viral. I wasn't advertising on my blog. It wasn't anything like that, but I knew it took time. And so I remember in several years early on, I would, um, have our usual ministry dinners or um, appointments, things like that. But as soon as the kids went down, if we weren't doing some kind of counseling, I wasn't on the phone with friends. I wasn't watching a movie. I wasn't texting with people. I was writing because you make time for things that are important to you. And for me, it was more important than watching a TV series. It was more important than doing other social things. And I remember feeling initially, I don't know that I had any friends who straight up, you know, disapproved, but I remember thinking and feeling like I was alone. I felt that as I was sharing what I was doing, nobody else at the time, I didn't know anybody else at the time in my immediate circles that was doing that. And so I couldn't call up a friend and say, "How's it going for you?" Or, "You want to sit in the coffee shop together and both write?" I didn't have anybody to share that with. And then as things grew and my writing was getting shared, I remember the first time ever when my post was picked up by somebody and was hat tipped by Tim Challies, as in the content of something I wrote ended up on Tim Challies' blog. I was like, "Whoa, what? What in the world?" And I so respected him and I so was reading his blog and was so surprised at this whole idea of somebody reposting my work and hat tipping it. And so I don't know if any of you remember back in those days. This was late 2000s or early 2010s, I guess. And and as things were taking off, I started getting invited to speak or participate in blogging conferences. So I wish I had all these dates in mind, but really, friends, when I first spoke at a blogging conference, I felt so strange. I was like, I can't believe I'm a stay-at-home mama with all these children, my littles, and I think at the time I had 5, and I was for once packing up my bags and going somewhere where I was going to see like-minded people and talk about this thing we were doing called blogging and how to do it well. And I remember I had lunch at one point with Sally Clarkson, who you all have heard on my podcast. You know, as somebody who's a dear friend, she's an older sister in Christ who has mothered and led and encouraged homeschooling mamas and mamas in general. And I remember she was running a conference at that point, and she says to me, I'd really love for you to consider potentially coming and speaking at one of these events. And I think she was not only just really being really gracious to me at the time, but also encouraging my work in it. And I came home from this trip and I was delighted. I was just over the top excited. And I think I shared with several friends. And I remember thinking that my friends and at the time we were leaders in a local church. We had been church planting. We were also founders of a school. So we were also in a tight community where we were leaders of a classical Christian school, leaders in two, organizations. And in both cases, when I shared my excitement, I imagined my friends to be like, what? No way. No way. I'm so excited for you. What in the world? You're going to speak at a conference? Or what? Sally Clarkson wants to invite you to join her? I thought my friends were going to explode because I imagined them being so excited for me because at the time I remember one of the moms groups had been reading one of her motherhood books um, and I was no one. I was just a mama who I was no one publicly. And I was just somebody who was faithfully raising my kids, serving in my community. And I come home from this trip and most of my friends really probably didn't know much about all the things that I was doing. And I was starting to pick up a little traction on social media. And the key is I just want to say I was consistent. I was super consistent. I wasn't famous. I didn't have a million followers. I was just really consistent. This was before TikTok. This was before everybody blew up online or somehow someone went super viral. This was when people didn't necessarily realize that this could turn into a full-time career or you could get published from being consistent online. And so I know I've shared this before, but I think somewhere I wrote every single day for an entire year without missing a day for the discipline of it. I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't getting famous. I didn't get a book deal. I just wanted the consistency and the challenge of pursuing something that maybe was hard, but was worth it for me. And so I had put in the hours. I had put in the hours. I wasn't surprised that maybe my work was getting out there or that somebody like Sally Clarkson, so many years ahead of me, would say, hey, I admire you. Why don't you join me? And now we're friends, But at the time when I came home, I remember several friends as shared with them, and these are people who loved me, loved our family. It wasn't that they were mean, but they just didn't know how to respond. They just were like, oh, okay. And if you're watching me on YouTube, you can see my face. I'm trying to show you what it's like when somebody says, "Oh, that's great." And they're not excited for you. They're not really, it's like, "Okay." And I remember thinking early on that I worried, are they worried that I'm not going to be as responsible or as involved in the things that they know from me? Are they worried that I'm not going to be a fully dedicated pastor's wife or a fully involved school founder? I wondered if there was fear that I was going to pull away from my real everyday life, which was not going to happen and still has not happened. I'm still very, very involved in my actual local community. However, I also just remember thinking, wow, I wonder if I'm going to lose some friends because my friends don't understand what I'm doing. And I remember thinking, even just that I had to keep my mouth shut. I couldn't talk about the exciting things that were happening or how hard I was working on what I was trying to accomplish because it just wasn't necessarily what everybody else was doing. I even think I experienced a little bit of that from both my parents and my in laws. I don't think they understood um, what I was trying to do. And I think when you don't understand something, your comments can come off negatively. it could come off like, oh, she'll get over this. She'll just get this out of her system and she'll move on and do something else. And I don't blame them for saying those things or thinking those things, whether directly to me or about me, or if it was passive. I think sometimes, even if it was the most passive aggressive comment, I I felt it. I knew that not everybody believed in me. I knew that not everybody thought that what I was doing was worth my time. I knew that some people were probably rolling their eyes and going, "Oh my goodness, what is she doing?" I remember even working my way onto Instagram and using that platform. And this was the beginnings of how I ended up being published with my first book, Grace Laced. But I remember thinking that my friends imagined social media being totally just about having some family photos. But here I was posting images with my writing. And it felt like I was taking myself so seriously, right? Because it was so fun just to be like, look what I ate, look what I did. And it's just more like fun. But I was like, and I'm going to include a piece of writing with this. Um, it's funny because now I don't even think that no one would bat an eye. Like now you actually crave for people to be a little more raw and genuine and real, because everybody writes like actual copy or marketing copy, or every piece on social media has a call to action. Now it's like so normal, but at the time I felt really strange. And so I don't know if you're listening today. I just assumed that maybe if somebody asked me that question at a Q&A, that maybe it would be of service to you all to listen to an episode where I kind of go a little bit longer in this answer here because, um, on stage, I just shared a few thoughts there, but I spent some time preparing for this episode and I thought, wow, I would have loved for somebody to encourage me when I was stepping out. Because whether you feel called to start a business or journal every day because you want the discipline of it, or if you feel called to exercising and you're on a health journey and suddenly you think, well, I'm going to cut out sugar, let's say, but your friends are like, well, you're so boring. Why are you not eating ice cream anymore? Whatever it is that you're choosing to do, whether it's vocation um, or something that you feel really called in, whatever it is, I think it's safe to say you're going to be met with some resistance. You're going to feel alone. There are going to be times when you feel misunderstood. And I think it would be wise for us as brave individuals and as Christ followers to consider some things and to consider what is true as we step into obedience, whether it's being obedient in cutting some things out of our lives or being obedient in going towards a direction of adding some things in our lives. You see, I was being obedient in cutting out distractions that weren't getting me to my goal, but I was adding in activities and things that other people didn't understand. And I think it would be wise for us to recognize how that will feel and what the cost is and how we can be aligned with the truth. Because when you're doing important work, and important is a subjective word, right? Right. I'll just say when you're seeking to honor the Lord in doing what you feel called to do because you've prayed about it, because you have a longing, because the Lord's given you opportunity, whatever it is that you're trying to do, whether it's vocation or something with your health or rhythms, I think it's important for us to recognize that it will be costly and it will be hard. And so, inherent in the question, have you lost any friends or have you ever experienced lack of support? I think a lot of us know that the answer is yes for all of us who've done something that took risk, that took effort, and that took time away, sometimes even from people we love. I try my best to explain a lot of things that I do, but I also know that I won't always be understood, right? So I have a couple of thoughts I wanted to share with you all because I think there are lots of reasons why people may not celebrate our successes or our trajectory or the goals that we are setting for ourselves, right? I just shared a little bit about my story early on before I was published or before anything ever took off for me. But I think about how sometimes it is a sinful response, right? Sometimes those who don't celebrate us are jealous, they're envious. Sometimes it's because they're ignorant and they just don't know. They don't know what opportunities there are. They don't know maybe why you're doing what you're doing. They don't know how you're trying to steward your gifts or why you're making a financial decision. They may not know and they're ignorant about it. And sometimes I think it's fear and anxiety about friendship. It's kind of like what I was describing earlier, where sometimes a response is because they don't know if something's about to change and they feel fearful that you're going to be somebody different or you're going to not be available or you're not going to be the friend that you've been. And so some of those things you can speak into and control, and some things you cannot. I think as I was preparing, I was thinking about and I verbalized 5 encouragements that I would want to pass on, things that have served me well when I think about what to do when I don't feel celebrated. And truth be told, I'll just lean in and be really honest. Even in the last several years of my life, even after being on TV and having bestsellers and really succeeding at a lot of things that I'm doing, there are times when I have still felt alone. There are times when I still feel not celebrated, or there are times when I have felt resistance and maybe even a distancing from individuals because I'm not who they want me to be. That still happens. So I just want you to know that this is 5 encouragements that are born out of even how I am processing things today, right now, as I go. So we're learning together. I'm not some expert at this. I'm a work in progress, but I figured I'll go first and I'll be honest here, as I always promise to be on this podcast. And so, number one, my first encouragement is it's okay to be a trailblazer. You have to go first. If you're doing something that nobody else is doing, if you're working on something that nobody else has seen or understand, I think all genius and wonderful and brilliant and beautiful things oftentimes are born out of places where everybody thinks you're crazy and nobody's ever done it before. Maybe you're pairing 2 flavors together that have not been paired together. Or in my case, maybe you're combining watercolor art with deep spiritual, deep biblical truth. You're putting it into a hardback book. Nobody was doing that when I was doing it. Maybe you're trying to do something that takes a lot of research and you're stepping out and you're learning things that nobody's ever talked about. It's okay to be a trailblazer. Number 2, you're only responsible for yourself, even if others feel threatened. Another way to put it is you're not responsible for how other people feel about themselves due to your success. I'll say that again. You're not responsible for how other people feel about themselves as a result of your success. I say that just recognizing that sometimes we make ourselves really small. I have a tendency to. Y'all, one of these days I'll share more of my cultural background and my story of how there are lots of times I think largely being between 2 cultures, largely as a result of having an Asian American heritage. I think a lot of times I walk into a room and I make myself really small. I don't want to be the center of attention. I am apologetic and fearful if my presence affects the way you feel about yourself. I wrestle with that. I struggle with it. But I'm learning and growing because I know my identity in Christ is what matters most. And I don't have to apologize for what God is blessing in my life, what God is doing in my life. I can proclaim it and be confident that if I put success in its right place and I think of success as faithfulness, then there's nothing to apologize for. Just because I'm being faithful and succeeding in certain ways that I didn't plan and didn't expect to succeed in, and it's fruitful, doesn't mean that somebody who's feeling stuck in their lives, if they're feeling bad about it, that I have an opportunity to encourage them. I can't be responsible for how they feel, but I can step in and say, hey, I can encourage you in this. However, I won't make myself small. I won't hide. I'm not going to pretend that I don't do the work that I do because it threatens you or affects how you feel about yourself. Some practical ways that plays out, for example. So I'm part of a small local church. I love the local church. I love being a part of the body of Christ. Well, it could be easy for me to be a part of a small congregation and hide the fact that I'm going to speak on a big stage or I'm going to do a TV appearance because those kinds of things make me feel alone. I feel like if I share any of those things, I'm going to kind of make enemies or feel weird or people are going to think that I think myself so fancy. And I tried that for a season. I tried that where I hid and pretended that I didn't have any prayer requests, that I just kind of was like, I don't want to seem fancy. But then I realized that's not real community. If I am confident that this is what the Lord's called me to do, I can show up at women's Bible study and say, would you pray for me? I'm really nervous about my next speaking event. Or would you pray for me? I've got to study if I want to write this manuscript that I'm in the middle of. Do you see how um, I have learned that real relationship and real friendship will come out of me being a really authentic person and sharing really from the outworkings of my life rather than hiding and pretending and being fearful that my life will cause you to feel certain things about yours. We're just not going to do that. We're going to be honest and we're going to love one another and be fully who we are and give that to one another. Number three, my third encouragement would be it's a pretty obvious one, but it's served me again and again is to work as unto the Lord. That fundamentally, my goal is not to impress you, impress somebody else. I'm not trying to gain somebody's approval by being really impressive or not very impressive, by making myself bigger or making myself smaller. Colossians 3:23 through 34 says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. That's the audience of one. That's that principle, right? The principle that it doesn't matter if you are standing before 2,000 or 200,000 or two at your kitchen table. Your true audience is actually the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think it served me so well over the years to remember that if others don't celebrate my work, it's okay if fundamentally and work, like I said, could mean me taking a lot of time to be with my children or choosing a certain career path or um, being on a certain health journey. All of that, if I am honoring the Lord and I'm right with God about it, it's okay if I don't have the applause of others. It's okay if not everybody wants to come along and join me. It's okay if not everybody understands and celebrates it constantly. So work unto the Lord. Is that's three, right? Number four, so simple, but be patient. I say that because I have learned in my, um, almost, I think it's 15, 16 years of being online, my career in the last decade or so, um, I've learned that I'm a work in progress. Others are a work in progress. The people I love who may not celebrate me right this minute, be patient with them. Be patient with those that you long to love you a certain way, long to celebrate you a certain way. There are words that I remember hearing that I kept replaying in my mind. Hurtful words, right? Words from people that I love that I thought, why would you say that about what I'm doing? Or why would you misunderstand so much? Or I wish you really celebrated or were proud of me. And I would rehearse the words that represented, lack of support or lack of pride, or I would take it personally if somebody I really loved or cared about didn't didn't want to read my book or didn't celebrate what I was doing or didn't call me when something special happened. And I just realized, okay, be patient because I'm not. the best at celebrating everything. I'm not always everything that my friends need to be. I desire for them to be patient with me in the same way. So be patient with one another. We're a work in progress. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, is to stay humble. I think that's staying humble and having a posture of humility undergirds all five of these, right? To be patient or to work as unto the Lord for the audience of one, or to not feel responsible for how other people feel about themselves just because you're being faithful. That takes humility. Being a trailblazer and being brave enough to step out and do your own thing takes humility, because at the end of the day, the thing that matters most is whether or not we can stay the course. It doesn't matter whether people celebrate us or not if we're not being faithful and if we can't stay the course. And friend, to stay the course on the thing that God's called you to do, whether you're starting off or whether you're maintaining or persevering or whether you have been on this journey for 2 decades, whatever it is that you're doing, to stay humble is to remember why you started in the first place. To stay humble is to remember your calling, your commissioning, your conviction, and why it mattered so much that you would be willing to feel a little lonely. You're willing to sacrifice some comforts, that you're willing to be misunderstood. You have to stay humble to remember why you did it in the first place. 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 6 and 7 say, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. I've always loved this passage, probably because I struggle with having anxious thoughts. I struggle with the anxieties of 3 a.m. kind of going, why can't I fix this? Or why can't so and so see it my way? And if I listen to these words here, I recognize that it's under God's care and control. God is sovereign over when he exalts and when he keeps us low, when he makes things really visible and when he keeps things hidden. At the proper time, he may exalt you. That when God deems it correct and right, he will do what he will with your faithfulness. Just continue, humble yourselves, continue to put yourself under God's authority. That's what humility is. To have a posture of humility when Peter says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, it's to put yourselves under the submission. I mean, submit yourself and put yourself under the authority of God's mighty hand, knowing that I am the clay. He gets to do whatever he will. He can form me, shape me, utilize me in whatever way he chooses, whether it's to exalt or not. And I can cast my anxieties on him because it's all out of trusting that he cares for me, that I can even submit in the first place. So, friend, I don't know what you're embarking on today. I don't know what it is that maybe you're like, oh, I got to step out in this, but what will they think? Or will my family approve? Or will they say, oh my goodness, you're wasting your time? Well, friend, I trust that you're talking to the Lord about it. This doesn't apply to dumb things that we do that we're not consulting the Lord or consulting the word. But if you've consulted the word, if you consulted the Lord, if you've put yourself under the mighty hand of God and you are submitting to him and the Lord's given you a green light to walk through the doors that are before you, if you can step out in faith and begin in that direction of obedience, then apply these 5 things. Be a trailblazer. Be okay with others misunderstanding and feeling whatever they need to feel. Work unto the Lord. Be patient. Stay humble. And remember that you don't need to be celebrated to be faithful. You don't need to be applauded and most popular or considered the best to be pleasing to God. So start there. Stay faithful. Don't give up. The Lord's at work. He's at work in you. He's at work in all those who don't celebrate you. It's okay. He's got you. He loves you so very, very much. I'm grateful for you. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. Love y'all. Talk to you soon.